Project management framework. The way we're going to start running these things now is we're going to start talking about the way the PMBOK looks at each area. We're going to talk a little bit about trends. We're going to talk a little bit about key concepts, and then we're going to talk about some tools. When we get into the knowledge areas after this section, we're going to do a similar thing where we're going to start talking about the knowledge. We're going to define the knowledge areas. We're going to define the processes. We're then going to talk about key concepts. We're then going to talk about trends. We're going to talk about tailoring. Then we're going to look at all the processes individually. So when we talk about framework, we start off with the PMBOK. And again, we've said this before. We're going to say it again. When we talk about the PMBOK, we're talking about a subset of project management knowledge. First of all, it's generally recognized. That is, their best practices. When I took the exam, PMI was run by a bunch of engineers that worked on big government projects. And the feeling among those folks was that we know how to bring projects in on time, on budget, and in scope. Just shut up and do what we're telling you to do and everything's going to be great. Well, over time, the fallacy of that logic became apparent to all. And then we kind of moved into a phase where people would say to me all the time, there sure is a lot of stuff in that PMBOK. Does anybody use it? And I heard the PMI's president was interviewed about a year or two ago, and they asked him that. And he answered it really brilliantly. He said that the way he looked at it, the PMBOK was a recipe book, okay? And that what the project manager should do is take the best practices out of there that were relevant to their projects and apply them. In other words, what we're talking about is bringing value. We're still interested on time, on budget, and in scope, but the overriding concern now is bringing value. And so the PMI's president said he considers it a recipe book, and Pete Matassa says, I can make you the best souffle in the world, but if you don't like souffles, it doesn't make any difference. So again, there's really good practices in there, and your focus needs to be on bringing value to your organization with the practices that make sense. And again, in that line, it's tailorable. And this is new to the 6th edition. In the past, they always said, here's the best practices. In the 6th edition, they started to say at PMI, we have these best practices, but you need to look at this and this and this and this and this and maybe tailor it to fit the needs of your project. And that'll become very apparent to you, especially when we get into the knowledge areas. As I mentioned earlier, the PMBOK is just about project management. It's not about anything else. And it provides a lexicon, or more to the point, a common vocabulary that all PMPs can use and talk to each other, and everybody knows what the other person's talking about. The hierarchy of project management is portfolio management, program management, and project management. The emphasis of the PMP exam is on project management. Projects are defined as being a temporary endeavor. They have a definite start and a definite end, and they produce a unique product, service, or result. Later on, we will contrast that with ongoing operations that are not temporary. They go on until retirement of the product, and they produce a standard product, service, or result. When we talk about a unique product, service, and result, we can be talking about meeting a regulatory need, creating or improving a product, satisfying a stakeholder need, or implementing a business strategy. PMI likes to believe that projects are tools that organizations use to go from strategic goal to dollars. In other words, ongoing operations. And so when we get into things like earned value management, we talk about the budget as being an investment the organization is making in your project in the hopes of reaping some money and profits through ongoing operations and carrying out the organization's strategy. When we talk about program management, we're talking about projects that have similar work or correlated activities that can be coordinated in a way to get economies of scale and standards. Programs can be interacting with operations as the result of integrating the results of project and programs into operations. Typically with the program, we would get a number of projects that have similar results or similar resources where it makes sense to manage them as a group. Portfolio management involves a group of projects and our programs that have some degree of interactivity related to the strategic goal. So again, when you think about portfolios, think about alignment to strategic goals. When you think about programs, think about efficiency. When you think about projects, think about temporary endeavor, unique product, service, or result. So again, projects, temporary endeavor, unique product, service, or result. Portfolio is aligning to the organization's strategic goals. Programs, project coordination, project standards, project support, and projects in scope, on budget, on schedule. When we talk about project types, and I'm going to kind of move off to the side for a couple of minutes and talk briefly about portfolios, because it's important to understand the way portfolios flow down to projects. When we talk about project types, there are typically 4 types of projects. There are bread and butter projects, which basically involve becoming more efficient at what we do right now. There are pearls, which involve revolutionary commercial opportunities using proven technical advances. So we might decide that if we retool ourselves or buy the next generation of equipment, we can enter other markets. There are oysters which pay off down the road. These are walking on the razor, bleeding edge types of projects that we expect to get great dollars from down the road. And then there are white elephants, which are projects that may have made sense, but we know now they're really not working out. The problem with not having good portfolio management is that people being people, left to their own devices, would just do bread and butter projects because the return is immediate. The problem with that is if you just focus on bread and butter projects, what's going to happen is you are going to end up with a larger and larger share of a smaller and smaller market. And that is not a recipe for success 10 years from now. So what we want to do with portfolio management is we need to understand that, one, we have strategic goals. We like to say no less than 3, no more than 7. And not only do we have these goals, but some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term. And what we should do is we should have the right mix of long-term projects and short-term projects to both meet our immediate needs for profitability as well as set us up to make money down the road. So when we look at organizational project management, again, taking it from the portfolio level all the way out to operations, we have our strategy, which drives our portfolios, which drives our programs and projects, which then filter out to ongoing operations. And of course, the results of those ongoing operations give us the information we need for future strategies. We're going to do a couple of definitions right now. The first one is the PMO. When I was a young project manager, when you saw the acronym PMO, what you thought was Project Management Office. Today, when I see PMO, I think Program Management Office. From the standpoint of PMI, PMO can either mean Project Management Office or Program Management Office because, frankly, the way PMI defines the Project Management Office is exactly how the program offices are defined. So typically, when we talk about a PMO, it's the management organization that supports the project management function. If I've got an organization with a very robust project management infrastructure that's comprised of project managers that are assigned out to projects as needed, It's going to be a centralized area for project managers to go back to when they're between projects. Also, a PMO should provide your standards. The standards that come out of the PMO will be twofold. First of all, they'll be the rules of the road. Second of all, they'll be supporting projects with templates. As you're going to see as we go through this course, PMI is very document-centric, even on the adaptive side of the project lifecycle. People will say to me, gee whiz, Pete, I'll be spending all my time just doing documentation if I try to run my show per PMI. And my response to that is, if you've got a good PMO, they're giving you templates for most of those documents. As I like to say, a risk plan's a risk plan's a risk plan, a cost plan's a cost plan's a cost plan, a schedule plan's a schedule plan's a schedule plan. If I've got a template, I can just tweak that to my particular project needs. As a matter of fact, the only plans that really are unique to every project are the quality plan and the procurement plan. And also, another role of the PMO is to do auditing. As we will mention when we get into quality again, basically we do audits for two reasons. The first reason we do audits is to make sure everybody's playing the game by the rules. The second reason we do audits is to make sure that we're getting out of our project management standards what we expect to get out of them. In other words, when we talk about audits, we talk about precision and accuracy. Precision means that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Accuracy means we're also hitting our targets. So if our goals are to have our projects come out within a definitive range of minus 5 plus 10 to our baseline, and in reality, we're coming out more like minus 20 plus 50, and everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, it means it's on the PMO to change the standards to produce projects that actually deliver. So we audit for two reasons. Again, we want to make sure everybody's playing the game by the rules. And two, we want to make sure we're getting out of those standards what we expected to get out of them. Our process groups are our domains in project management. There's 5 of them: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. If we have a waterfall environment, back at the predictive end of the life cycle, what we like to call traditional project management, first I initiate, then I plan. Executing and monitoring and controlling tend to be they're spiraling together because I'm always executing and checking, and then I'm closing my project. Project life cycles. Project life cycles is kind of another way of saying project management methodologies. One of the advancements in the 6th edition is PMI has done a much better job of defining the continuum between predictive and waterfall and agile or adaptive. When we talk about predictive life cycles or predictive project management methodologies, we're talking about what I like to call righteous problems. They're projects where success is known going into them. In other words, I'm not saying that building a bridge or building an office building is easy. As a matter of fact, you know it's hard. You know it takes a lot of coordination. You know it takes a lot of skill. However, I think pretty much everybody knows what a bridge is going to look like when you start. So if you're in a predictive type of life cycle, I can use a waterfall methodology where I can do all my planning up front to figure out the most efficient way of doing it and then execute that plan. The next level, and again, we're going from predictive, where we have a lot of certainty. And by the way, with project management, certainty equals risk, okay? So on the far left extreme, we have predictive life cycles where we have a great deal of certainty and they're highly inflexible. We put together a plan and we execute it. On the far right, we have agile, adaptive, agile with a capital A, where we have a great deal of risk and a great deal of uncertainty. And as a result, we have a lot more flexibility. So the next level going from left to right is what's called iterative. And in an iterative life cycle, the scope, time, and cost can be determined early in the life of the project, but there's a little more uncertainty, so we know we're probably going to be adjusting those estimates as the project continues through. So what we do in an iterative life cycle is, as opposed to this big long project, we try to break the project into smaller chunks. That way we can get the feedback and make the minor corrections we need to make as the project is moving on. The next life cycle, moving again from certain to uncertain, inflexible to very flexible, is called incremental. In an incremental project life cycle, what we're doing, to use the vocabulary, if you will, of the agile people, is we're doing incremental improvements. So what we're doing is we're determining what's called a minimum viable product or a minimal marketable feature, and we're creating that. And then we're saying to the client, okay, now that you've got that, what's the next upgrade you want to have? Back in the days when I was an IT manager, people were always wanting to change our projects. And my favorite remark was, well, that's V2. Okay, let's get this done, and then we'll work on that. Moving again from certainty to uncertainty, we have adaptive and agile life cycles. And here we kind of take incremental up to the next level, where we talk about things like eating our dessert first and failing fast. When we get into highly adaptive or agile life cycles, what we want to do is we want to talk very specifically, in as small as possible, what do you absolutely positively have to have. We try to totally strip out the nice to haves, because one of the things we found is that once people see something, it tends to change their perspective on what's important. More to the point, back in the old days of managing IT projects, we were trying to put a round peg in a square hole. We were trying to apply a waterfall methodology, highly predictive, to an agile environment, okay, where people always kept changing their minds. So we would spend a couple of months dutifully, documenting requirements from our stakeholders, and then we would say, okay, and we'd put together our plan and we'd close the door, and then we'd work on it for about 6 months, and then we'd come back to the client and say, here you go, and they'd go, nah, that's not what we want, okay, and we would be crushed. We wouldn't be crushed because we knew it was going to happen, but we would break out the requirements and we'd say, now wait a minute, you said you wanted this and this and this and this and this, and the client would say, of course I said that, and you did exactly what I asked you to do, but now that I see it, I know I don't like it. And so when you're in that kind of an environment, you want to use an adaptive or agile type of methodology, where we say, just tell me the really single most important thing. Let's get it out there, see how it looks. If you don't like it, we haven't put that much effort into it, it'll be easy to change it. Again, as we move more towards uncertainty or risk, we want more flexibility in the process. In a predictive life cycle, one of the major roles of a project manager is to, quote unquote, minimize unnecessary changes. When I move out to an adaptive or agile life cycle, not only are we okay with changes, we encourage them. We want the stakeholders always coming in and telling us, well, how about if we change this? How about if we change that? Okay. Hybrid life cycles. Hybrid life cycles are a combination of predictive and adaptive life cycles. In other words, let's say I was building a data warehouse. We've been doing databases for a while. I mean, I can remember when SAP was literally putting companies out of business because it was such a disaster. And today SAP is really awesome because we figured out what worked and what didn't work. And SAP and some other major database applications are just killing it. And so because of that, if I'm putting together a big data mining project, when it comes to the database end of it, I can run that with the predictive life cycle. On the other hand, when it comes to the GUI, what people are seeing on the screens, people always change their mind. So what I will probably do is I'll run the database part of that project as predictive, and I'll run the screen human interface part of that project as adaptive, hybrid. So what's best? Well, the correct project life cycle is determined by the team. And we consider things like identifying the processes needed to be performed in each phase. And by the way, on this test, when you see the word phase, phase equals subproject. Performing the processes identified in the appropriate phase and adjusting the attributes of the phase as needed for the project's success. In other words, tailoring. Project phases. Again, as I said a minute ago, when you see the word phase, think subproject. Project phases is a collection of logically related project activities that culminates in the completion of one or more deliverables. We made the attributes of the phase or subproject, or how we identify it, can be a name and or a number. It could be a function of duration. It could be a function of resource requirements, could be a function of the entrance criteria or the exit criteria. Again, what brings the most value to the stakeholder in the organization? Some of the different names we have for phases are some of the different names we would have for subprojects. Could be concept development, feasibility study, customer requirements, solution development, design, and prototype. In these slides here where I'm talking about these attributes, read them over about 3 times. There is nothing earth-shattering there, but you need to be familiar with it. When we talk about phase establishment is a function, it could be because of management need. It could be the nature of the project that determines how the phase is going to be set up. It could be the industry's unique characteristics. It could be the technology that's available, or it could be a function of the decision points. Again, 3 to 4 times this slide as well. Phase gate is a project performance measure held at the end of each phase to review. Let me talk about that for a minute. We talked a few minutes ago about iterative project life cycles. When we talk about iterative project life cycles, one of the main types of that is called a phase gate type of project, where at the end of each iteration or each subproject or each phase, they all mean the same thing, a team looks at what was produced and makes a decision. Either, yeah, we're going down the right path, let's continue, or maybe we need to modify a few things to make it work, or this is a dog, time to kill it, okay? So when we talk about those phase gates, we'd be referring back to things like the business case, the project charter, and the project management plan. And when we get to one of those phase gates, which also are known to be called as kill points, we are going to make a go, no-go decision. We're either going to continue on to the next phase, we're either going to continue with modification, we're going to end the project, which means we kill it. We may want to go back and make a few changes just to kind of tweak it a little, or we may say, you know what, we need to completely redo that phase. Phase-to-phase relationships. When we have projects, depending on the needs of the project, they could be, usually we think sequentially, but not necessarily. The needs of the project may be sequential, or they may be overlapping. So, waterfall implies sequential, iterative implies doing small chunks, progressive elaboration involves overlapping. When I talk about progressive elaboration, I'm talking about things like what we call rolling wave. In a rolling wave project, the phases kind of depend on each other. More to the point, if I'm doing a rolling wave type of project, typically I'm doing a project where I've never done this before, so I'm going to have to do some experimentation. So there's no way that I can plan the second wave, or the second phase, if you will, until I get significant results from the first phase, because the results of my experimentation in phase 1 are going to impact my planning for phase 2. And this is an example of sequential or an iterative kind of stage gate process. The phases, again, can overlap, and I just talked about that. Here's an example of an overlapping one, where as I get near the end of the design phase, I know enough to start on the building phase. And again, phase equals subproject equals iteration. Project tailoring. I've said this term a couple times already. In the 6th edition, there's been a real recognition of the needs to tailor projects so we provide value to the organization. So we can tailor based on expert judgment within the organization. In other words, okay, that standard's fine, but I'm going to tell you right now it's not working in this project. We can tailor it based on methodology purchased from a vendor. In other words, we can go ahead and we can say, okay, this is the way the vendor says we should do it, but maybe we want to change it a little. Or we might say, instead of doing it in-house, we're going to buy this turnkey type of project plan from a vendor. We can do the same thing with a professional organization or a government agency. The business case. And I know I said it a couple of minutes ago, and I'm going to say it again. These slides where we're doing definitions like this, you want to read them over about 3 times. The business case is basically the feasibility study that determines whether or not there's going to be value here. Typically with the business case, we want to show a tie to a strategic objective, as well as showing a tie to make money. So in a feasibility study, we should address the business needs, an analysis of the situation, an identification of the options, a recommendation, and then an evaluation. Project benefits management plan is part of the business case. It's a document that describes how and when the benefits of the project will be delivered, including target benefits, strategic alignment, time frame for realizing benefits, who the owner is, any metrics we're going to use to determine success, any assumptions we have, any risks we have, and any success measures. Again, look over these slides a couple, 3 times, and I don't want you to memorize them. When I say look over a slide 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times, it's not necessarily meant to memorize, but when you're looking at situational questions, these are the things that need to be in the back of your mind. So you've got to kind of get them back there through looking at them, through repetition, so you'll be thinking of them. This slide here is an interesting slide that you see often. There's things I like about this particular slide. There's things I don't like about it, so I want to talk about it. I like the fact that it shows the project boundaries really well. We have our initiation, our inputs, which would be our business case. Once the project's initiated and we get a charter, we plan and execute, and we also monitor and control, and then we close it. I don't like that particular part of the slide because honestly, I would rather see a straight line from initiation to planning and then execution to monitor and control spiraling like that. The other thing I really like about it is typically when people think of projects, they think about the project deliverables going to the end users. This slide explicitly points out that we have project records that are going to process assets, and more specifically, organizational process assets. And we'll talk more about them a little later in the class.